Okay, welcome to part B of video number 1 for module 4. You heard Rico Suave, our Pomeranian, in the background there. I think we've got him taken care of. So I'm going to go quickly through this and then show you a few things, and we'll be done with this first section. So we mentioned, of course, limited phonemic awareness is critical, is a huge issue. It's the number one issue in decoding difficulties. I also noticed that sort of underlearned letter sounds for kids at the very beginning of basic decoding is a real struggle. I always say that, there's a very much an automaticity or a timing issue to so many parts of reading. When you look at a kid who maybe you say, well, they know all their letter sounds, but I show him that letter assessment and they look at the B and they go, oh, wait, I know this one. It's buh. Well, in the end, you'd have to check off that yes, indeed, they know it. But do they know it at that sort of automatic level that it takes to use it when you have to blend that sound with other sounds to read the word bat? So very important that kids not only know their letter sounds, but they know them with that strong sort of bond, that automaticity. Next, I see the texts that don't support decoding as a strategy for word recognition. Really, kids really suffer from that. Connie Jewell, our same scholar from the first page, demonstrated this way back in the 80s, where they had a nice sort of laboratory case in a school district in Texas where everyone in the district used the same 30-minute phonics instruction program. So all the kids were getting the same instruction in phonics, but from there, each school could go in whatever direction they wanted in terms of a basal reader. Was it highly decodable text that focused on the phonics relations that the kids were learning? Was it a more literary text, more repetitive text, those kinds of things? So they set up a study to really look at what was the impact of different text types on these beginning readers. Well, they found even by November of first grade that the kids who were reading from readers that supported the phonics instruction that they were receiving and encouraged a decoding strategy were far ahead of kids who were in more sort of literary text, predictable texts, and so forth. By the end of the year, it was dramatic. The kids in the phonics, the decodable text, made much more progress, much more transfer in terms of reading unfamiliar words. And what's particularly devastating is the kids in the less regular texts, the more literary texts, actually were seen to be abandoning the very phonics strategies that they were being taught during the half-hour phonics instruction because they simply didn't work. I always use the example. I have a text, I don't have it with me here, unfortunately, written clearly for like kindergarten and beginning of first grade that says basically, I see a, and then fill in the blank of some sort of zoo animal. Hippopotamus. If you are 5, you've just learned some basic phonics relationships, and you get to the word hippopotamus, good luck with that, right? That text by itself actually pushes kids away from using a decoding strategy, and it emphasizes sort of looking at the picture or seeing the first letter and guessing, rather than carefully analyzing the word in a thorough decoding manner. So texts in beginning reading are really critical. I'm not saying that every book that a kindergartner or first grader should read should be absolutely decodable. By decodable, I mean things like, Sam sat, Matt sat on Sam. And, you get the idea. Now, there's a lot of those out today that are a lot better than that off the top of my head example. But it's not that every text a kid picks up has to be that way. But there better be some in their reading diet, a healthy portion of their reading diet, because those are the texts that reveal to those kids that this phonics stuff, this blending stuff that we're learning really works. And I think I'll stick with it and I'll use it. And of course, they're also getting practice doing so. All right. As we move up the grades, I think we saw in our first unit that there are sort of late onset reading difficulties that, pertain to just word recognition. And, it's no surprise that decoding cat and decoding multifarious are very different tasks. And I think that in this case, it's truly largely an instructional deficit of teachers moving up the grades, kind of thinking that the word recognition instruction is largely done and not recognizing that the target has really changed from kind of more basic single syllable or simple two-syllable words like picnic to some very complex orthographic words that need a little bit of support in terms of instruction. Next, if we're talking about strugglers, what I see a lot of times is the right instruction, but at the inappropriate level of intensity. If we're trying to overcome an environmental deficit or perhaps a slight processing deficit, it matters not just to do the right thing, but to do it at a sufficient intensity to kind of have that cognitive breakthrough. And so I think a lot of times that kids struggle simply because we don't prioritize the critical task of decoding and give it sufficient time and sufficient guided practice to truly consolidate those skills. Finally, because we've had a lot of people interested in English learners in this class, which is great, I want to throw out, and I did this in the first discussion, I believe, that we know very clearly from research that young English learners struggle with beginning reading and decoding for exactly the same reasons as native English speakers. The hallmark of English learners, of course, is very limited oral English vocabulary. It goes without saying. They're just learning the language. However, it's clear from research that that is not really an obstacle to beginning reading, to decoding and text reading down in kindergarten and first grade. And I think there's a good common sense reason for that. The texts that we ask kids to read in kindergarten and first grade are, so basic that even almost having no vocabulary really doesn't prove to be an obstacle. And so we see kids who are basically non-English speakers or extremely limited English speakers who perform right along with their native English-speaking peers in terms of early word recognition and text reading. Now, does that vocabulary deficit become a real issue later on? Of course. But in terms of beginning reading, we really can expect the same things from our English learners as our native speakers. And if they're struggling, they really are struggling for the same reasons. Limited phonemic awareness, underlearned letter sounds, issues around instruction and text use. All right. Let's move on then. Those are, this is the sort of me talking at you. Now I want to take up some of the pieces of this puzzle and show you a few things. So let's start with the phonemic awareness piece. Of course, I think that, most people are very aware of the role of phonemic awareness and how to teach it. So I'm going to be kind of brief here. What we know about phonemic awareness in the early grades is that it's highly responsive to instruction. That's a good thing. That means, I always say it's the field of dreams, the Kevin Costner principle, right? If you teach it, they will learn. We see this is true for about 97% of kids that we would, it's only that bottom 3 that we might call truly dyslexic that don't respond positively and develop the kind of benchmark phonemic awareness skills that they need to read. So if we have a lot of kids who are in this camp, you gotta take a good solid look at the instruction they're getting. All right, a few points about phonemic awareness instruction. This, I consider phonemic awareness instruction to be basically a kindergarten skill. It's a short window skill. It's critically important right in the beginning of reading. It doesn't have really much predictive validity for kids in 5th grade. So it's just one of those things that it's critical to do well, and do in its time, and then basically we can forget about for the rest of the way. Okay, what we know is that ability to segment the initial phonemes in words. To say, when I say to a kid, cat, what sound do you hear at the beginning of cat? And the kid comes back with k. That is a critical prerequisite skill for learning letter sounds. If you have a kid who is not learning letter sounds, not retaining those sounds, 100% of the time, in my experience, they have extremely limited phonemic awareness, such that they have difficulty even isolating that initial phoneme in a word. Why is this the case? Well, think about it. How do we teach letters? Kids, this is the letter M, and it says like we hear in moon and mouse. And the kids who can hear the at the beginning of mouse go, oh, I get it. I see how that's working. But how about for the kid who you say, what's the first sound you hear in mouse? And they say, mouse? And they just aren't able to pull that apart. Well, all of that explanation, it's what we hear in mouse and moon, makes no sense to them. And that they don't even connect it to a sound that's coming out of their mouth when they speak words. It's an arbitrary bit of noise. And so it becomes a very difficult sort of retention issue to remember all these sort of squiggly abstract graphemes and all those random bits of noise. Now, it's the level of full segmentation or full blending that's necessary for reading and writing. So this is where we say, can you tell me the sounds in cat? And the kid can say, k, a, t. Or conversely, I give him those sounds and he can blend them together and say, oh, your word is cat. It's only at this level that the phoneme stuff really kicks in and proves consequential for reading. Effective instruction, well, it's going to move quickly to this full phoneme segmenting and blending level, because that's the level where we get the payoff in reading. We've seen that effective instruction has kids both blend and segment, or segment and blend, in the same sort of learning activity. So going both ways is helpful. It involves manipulatives. The thing about phonemes, they're so slippery, they're invisible. It's just that sounds. How nice to tie those sounds to sort of cubes, tokens, things that you can touch as you make them, and we'll see that in a second. Careful modeling and feedback. This is really detailed instruction, as any kindergarten teacher would know. You got to get down to the nitty-gritty with kids, especially kids who struggle. And then finally, quickly moving to where we add letters and letter sounds into this instruction. So we're dealing with the alphabetic principle, as it's generally called. I actually like the word, and you'll read my very brief piece. I like to say phonemes in use, where we put all this sound knowledge we have into use to actually read and write words. And I think that's a very descriptive, apropos sort of category for this. So let me show you something that I think models these good, sort of elements of effective phoneme instruction. I'm sure most of you down in kindergarten are doing some things that are very similar. I realize that. But in particular, what I'm going to show you is the Say and Move activity created by Ball and Blackman back in right around 1990. The research on this showed that 44 lessons in Say It and Move It across 11 weeks, so 4 times a week, in kindergarten, was still predictive of reading achievement in 2nd grade. So folks, when you can do something for 11 weeks in kindergarten that's still separating out haves and have-nots in reading in 2nd grade, you know it's powerful. So watch how this, simple little say and move activity really incorporates the elements of effective instruction. So there's lots of different ways to look at this. Something that shows sound boxes and some sort of manipulative to move for each sound. And I say, kids, we're going to say it and move it for the word cat. I want you to line up your tokens under your sound boxes, and we're going to break apart each sound, and we're going to make that sound as we move our token into the box. So we say k, a, t. Now finger at the star. What's that word? Cat. Just that. Okay, put them back down. Let's go on. How about dog? D, a, g. Dog. So you see how this incorporates both segmenting and blending, full phoneme level, manipulatives, and it allows for very careful modeling and feedback. This all looks easy when when we as adults pick it up, but for a 5-year-old who struggles, you're going to get something like this often. Cat. At. Cat. Ooh. Notice though how this process allows for then some very careful feedback. I literally often will take their finger and say, okay, just the first sound, just k, k. What's next? Ah, ah. And you really have to slow it down with kids who struggle. I see a lot of phoneme instruction in a whole group type setting in kindergarten these days, which is great. It supports a lot of our learners. But for kids who struggle, how easy is it to slide by, never really doing the careful work that you need to do? Now, for our last point, this is the part of the phoneme in use activity. We can do it like this. We could say, this is phoneme, or say it and move it with letter sounds. So we'll say, kids, notice we're going to keep saying it and moving it with 3 sound words. But now I've given you the letter. What letter is that? T. What sound does it make? T. Good. We're going to listen and decide whether we hear the T at the beginning or end of the word, and then we're going to move the letter T that makes that sound wherever we hear the T. So our first word is top. Where do you hear the T in top? They say, oh, at the beginning, Mr. Maniac. I say, good. We'll put your T under the star box then at the beginning of the word, your other 2. Now let's say it and move it for top. T, p, top. Great, put them back. Now, how about bat? Say it and move it. Where do we hear the T in bat? T. Oh, it's at the end, Mr. Maniac. Great. All right, put it at the last box away from the star, and we go b-a-t, bat. This can get a little quickly if we've learned a lot of letter sounds. We can also reinforce our letter sounds. Give them 2 letters like this and say, now you got to listen for a or a t and where it goes. And we'll put the correct letter for the sound we hear. So how about if I say map? What do you hear? Oh, at the beginning. Great. There it is. Map. Super. Now, how about if I say dot? Oh, I hear that, and it's at the end. Great. Dot. And there you have it. So, again, I think that these kinds of activities are really prevalent today, and I'm very glad because they have powerful effects. They, I think, should form absolutely sort of a tier 2 or tier level intervention. You can get a lot of mileage out of this in a small group of 3 or 4. Just part of an early intervention, of course, but very powerful outcomes. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. We're going to go forward in a second video. I'm going to try and move fast and just show you some of these kinds of teaching activities that illustrate what I think are highly effective forms of instruction for things like alphabetic principle and basic blending and advanced decoding. Okay, so look forward to seeing you again soon.